Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. What day is it? Hey guys, founding of the EU, another EU video. My name is Connor. If you are new, I like to watch things and react to YouTube videos. Important job. Riveting, I know. Okay. Let's do it. The founding of the EU, go History Scope, great channel.
In today's episode, we'll be talking about early EU history from the World Wars until the European
That's bright. Okay, I'm ready.
community, so let's get to it. When the First World War ended, it was dubbed the war to end all wars.
Right.
After this war, nobody would even think about fighting another. World War II happened. It saw the deaths of over 50 million people, the Holocaust, and millions left without homes. This war changed world politics. After this war, all European powers were forced to give up their lucrative colonies over time and lost their status as world powers. After this war, an Iron Curtain split Europe into two opposing factions. After this war, the threat of nuclear annihilation hung over everybody's head. Europe could no longer afford another European war, or else it might be turned into a smoldering crater. So how could the leaders of Europe somehow prevent this from happening again? Winston Churchill came with the answer: create a United States of Europe. The first step towards this goal was set out in the Schuman Declaration in 1950. It stipulated a plan to combine Europe politically and economically, starting with the coal and steel industries. Why coal and steel? Because they were the backbone of war. They were needed to build tanks, ships, and guns. If these markets were combined between countries, it would tie your war production directly with that of your enemy. This made war not only unthinkable, but also impossible. And this union would have to
Very interesting, and I something that someone told me, but I hadn't really thought up until this point. And so so they were essentially linking the legs of like France and Germany. They're the ones that keep going at each other in order to make it more difficult if they hate each other again a few decades down the line to independently build up war efforts against each other. Okay.
Start with the two biggest rivals in Europe, Germany and France. And so in 1951 they signed the Treaty of Paris, a treaty that would mark the beginning of the European Union. Four more countries answered the call of peace. Along with Germany and France, there were the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg and Italy, forming the European Coal and Steel Community. The Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg and Italy, forming the European Coal and Steel Community. The Coal and Steel Community reduced tariffs on coal and steel, increased the trade of these goods tenfold between member countries, and created over 100,000 jobs. But it also had its failures. One of the goals was to create an integrated energy market, not just for coal, but also to include oil, gas, and nuclear. But they only achieved collaboration on nuclear. The European Coal and Steel Community wanted to prevent large corporations from dominating the coal and steel markets, as this had helped Hitler rise to power. It did so by preventing cartels from forming, and while this action did assure lower prices for its citizens, large corporations still emerged if they were simply more competitive than their rivals. As the years passed, it became clear that the coal and steel community was becoming outdated, and two new ideas sprung up. France wanted to create an atomic energy community so that the six countries could work together to generate nuclear energy for its citizens. Germany, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands wanted to create a common market where goods, services, and people could be exchanged without tariffs or border controls. So how did they reconcile these two ideas? Well, they did both, of course. The European Atomic Energy Community oversaw nuclear energy, and the European Economic Community, or EEC, oversaw economic integration. The EEC's first goal was to create a common price level for agricultural goods and create a customs union. You might be wondering, what the hell is a customs union? Basically, it means that the trade barriers...
Before we get into the customs union, so a big thing, I assumed that the European Union, I assumed this, okay? I'm not saying I ever knew I was right. I thought it was, okay, the USSR and the USA are enemies now fighting against each other, and after war-torn Europe looks around, they realize that, they don't want to rely on the USA militarily or economically, and so they have to build it up themselves. And so they all had a mutual interest in guarding against outside powers like the Soviet Union. But it was much more than that, and it was more seeing each other as a possible linchpin to something worse in the future, like another war between major powers in Europe, rather than it was a purely looking out and being worried about other countries. Okay.
Between the 6 EEC countries would be removed on certain products, but if anyone from outside the EEC wanted to trade with these countries, they would be paying the same tariff in each country. So let's say, for example, you are a French baker who wants to sell your croissant to Germany. Well, just for crossing that border, your customer has to pay an extra tax, a tariff, just for buying a French croissant. But with the EEC, that tariff was removed between the two countries. There would be no extra tax to pay for your croissants, and you would pay as much as you would for a German croissant. It also meant that if, for example, an English baker wanted to sell his croissant to either Germany or France, then in both countries the same tariff would apply, meaning that neither country had a disadvantage based on import taxes, thus making it easier for companies to do business in the EEC. Over the years, Europe became ever closer. Economies became more interconnected, governments worked together, and trade between the countries was increasing. But there was one person with whom this development just did not sit right. President Charles de Gaulle, the war hero who led the French government in exile during World War II. De Gaulle was a French nationalist, and he believed France was handing over too much power to the EEC. You see, up until this point, whenever countries decided for more integration, the 6 EEC countries would give authority over such matters to the European institutions, basically creating a sort of European government. This was facilitated by the USA and the United Kingdom, who helped guide Europe towards more integration. And it's especially this last part that did not sit well with de Gaulle. Why would the UK, a country in decline who was losing more and more of its colonies every year, and the USA, a country an ocean away, determine European affairs? De Gaulle proposed a new course for Europe. The UK, USA and NATO would have no more power in Europe. Power would be taken away from the EEC and turned back to the governments of the member states. And France would retake its role as the superpower in the world by dominating this new Western Europe. You can see how the
he rips off his mask and it's Napoleon.
rest of Europe was not so eager to replace the USA with France. Yeah, did you notice how half of Europe is gobbled up by this giant superpower right across our border? We need NATO. Stop trying to rule Europe. After years of negotiations, President de Gaulle pulled out of the EEC in 1965, practically shutting it down. The EEC needed a unanimous decision on any action it took, and without France there would always be one vote missing. So the countries of Europe did what they do best: compromise. They agreed that France would retake its seat on the EEC if 1. Any EEC country would be allowed to veto any EEC plans if it was a very important national interest, even if the majority voted in favor. 2. Create a common agricultural policy in the EEC that set the prices for fruits, vegetables, sugar and cereals. And 3. The EEC must ask approval on certain important topics from the member countries themselves. And so the idea of a united Europe had overcome topics from the member countries themselves. The EEC must ask approval on certain important topics from the member countries themselves. And so the idea of a united Europe had overcome its first obstacle. Come back next time to see how Europe moves forward and watch as the European community expands to other nations.
Okay, there were a few times there where I really wanted to pause, but I'm trying to transition to a more style of reacting that can benefit both the people who really don't like me pausing and some who don't mind it. I almost wish I had like a notepad to kind of write a few things down, but great video. A few things I want to comment on, and I hope I remember them. One is, oh yeah, this is the big one. France is much more interesting than I thought they were in terms of their policies towards the US and the UK post World War II. I learned that first in the Epic History TV Suez Canal two-part series, two-episode series, where the French really wanted to disregard the UK or US, what they say, and the French are a very proud people, obviously, so it's interesting how they were much more standoffish against the UK and US post World War II than I originally thought. The other big thing, I forgot exactly, but there was something I remembered. I wonder what the Otto von Bismarcks and the Frederick the Greats for Germany, or the Napoleon III, or Napoleon Bonaparte, the Napoleon, would have thought about the EU if they were told about it back then. I wonder what their opinions would be. Obviously, there's a lot of things that have happened since then and now, like the 2 world wars, that they wouldn't be able to comprehend, and so wouldn't be able to really factor into how they think about it, but I'd wonder that. All right, see you next time.